And before this video begins, I'd just like to give a special thank you to my Asban Team level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. What is the greatest TV show ever made? Some might say Breaking Bad for its incredible, deep and morally complex characters. Perhaps it's Star Trek for its galaxy-trotting exploration and inspiring sense of adventure and optimism. Or maybe it's something like The Twilight Zone with its distinctive anthology storytelling, exploring new themes and narratives every episode. However, to me, it's Doctor Who, an incredible historic show that has all these things and so much more. With complex characters, inspiring adventures, and constant new themes and settings, Doctor Who is by far the best show in the world, in my humble opinion. But if you look at its recent few years, you'd understandably be skeptical of such a claim. And no, I'm not talking about politics, casting, or anything like that. Doctor Who promises all of time and space, everything that has ever happened or ever will, but it hasn't been living up to that claim for a while now. Despite the foundation of the show being change and innovation, very little has changed since Doctor Who returned to screens in 2005. The fundamentals like villains, settings, companions and narratives have all begun to feel a bit familiar and stagnant. I love Doctor Who so much, but it does feel like it has lost its way and become complacent over the years. This isn't going to be a video about how and why Doctor Who sucks now. It's an exploration of how a show with almost infinite potential has stagnated and what it can do to try and get back on track. So without any further ado, join me as we uncover the stagnation of Doctor Who. I think the best place to start is the original inspiration for this video, the monsters. Many people often refer to a big three of sorts when it comes to Doctor Who villains. These are the Daleks, the Cybermen and the Master, who are all core parts of the show that have persisted for decades. Now there's nothing wrong with this, in theory, cycling through iconic villains, but it has become a bit repetitive by this point. Almost every modern series finale defaults to one or two of these big three monsters, like ticking off a checklist in a way. The Moffat era took steps to remedy this, with series 6, 7 and 9 avoiding these villains for the finale, but they still appeared in other episodes of those series and contributed to this fatigue of sorts. And of course series 8, 10 and 12 all paired up the Master and the Cybermen, which obviously created fatigue of its own. When every finale has the same three villains, there's no surprises anymore, there's no unpredictability. It's just the same every single time. Along with that, it really just dilutes their threat level like I talked about in my recent Dalek conspiracy video. I think it's high time to rest some of these monsters. The Master had a long rest during the 11th Doctor era and that did the character a world of good. The Cybermen have also had some rest periods, but they and the Daleks have really been overexposed, with their many defeats really devaluing them. It's hard to truly fear the Daleks when they show up every single year and get defeated in increasingly embarrassing ways. It reminds me of the Daleks being rested after Evil of the Daleks and the Cybermen not appearing during the entire 4-year tenure of the Third Doctor. Taking these villains away for multiple years makes it all the more impactful when they do come back. Despite Doctor Who Series 13 not exactly being amazing, I really like how it tries something new by having the Sontarans as the main villainous alien race throughout the series. Of course, the Daleks and Cybermen did show up during Flux, but it was such a breath of fresh air to finally have another established villain as the big bad for once. This is absolutely the direction the show needs to head in. Maybe with other well-known classic monsters like Ice Warriors, Wirren or Osirins for example. I know the Daleks keep returning because they're so iconic and memorable, but that's why it's important to build up new villains and monsters, giving them that prestige and narrative weight for the long run. Unfortunately, as I've explored before, the modern show has always struggled with this. Most modern villains and monsters are one-off threats that can't really be built up as big bads. The Weeping Angels are iconic and well known, but they aren't the kind of species that can be a big scheming series-wide villain. However, with that said, species like the Sycorax, Krillitane and even the Stenza could all be built up with good writing and become actual formidable threats worthy of finales. Varied villains are so much better for the show's long-term future prospects than cycling through the big three, so it absolutely needs to happen to avoid stagnation and overuse. Imagine something like Star Trek TNG, but without the Borg, Ferengi, or Q being introduced. It would just be Klingons and Romulans all the time. Oh wait, no, that's literally just Stargate SG-1. However, the monsters aren't the only thing in Doctor Who that's getting a little bit tired. I'm also a bit fed up with the constant Earth settings, particularly modern day England. Now, I get why, because it's the home of the show and its audience, but there's an entire planet to play with and explore. Doctor Who's idea of a brave setting is a historical, in England or America. It really is stunning and brave when we get yet another World War II story. Now, for all of its flaws, the Chibnall era did admittedly try to branch out, with international Earth settings like Hong Kong, China, Norway, India, Switzerland and Ukraine, all crammed into 3 series, compared to the only real unique Earth settings of series 1 to 10 being France, Italy and Germany, along with very brief trips to Japan, Egypt and Australia. I guess they invented their own nebulous Middle Eastern country for the Capaldi era, but the point stands that the Chibnall era really tried to open the show up, and hopefully that more international approach is continued going forward. There really is so much more out there, which makes it frustrating how the Doctor only ever seems to travel to the UK throughout its history. It's kind of how big blockbuster alien invasion movies are almost always localized entirely to Los Angeles or New York. It's tiring and so very played out by this point. And even if Doctor Who insists on constantly hanging around Earth, why is it so scared of the future? I know it initially sounds quite silly to say, but modern Doctor Who has barely actually explored a futuristic Earth itself, only space stations and colonies. Hungry Earth was set in 2020, Kill the Moon and Waters of Mars had brief Earth scenes in 2049 and 2059, leaving just 2 actual full stories set in a significant Earth future, those being The Rebel Flesh and Orphan 55. I genuinely find it confusing why so few TV episodes in the modern era travel to Earth itself in the future. I can only assume this is because they don't want it to age badly like a number of classic Who stories did. But who cares? I want to see the Doctor and their companion in the 38th century, racing through the streets of the Indochina capital and weaving through neon skyscrapers as they escape from flying security drones. It's not a budgetary issue because something like New Earth existed all the way back in 2006. It just seems like a conscious decision to avoid such settings, and I genuinely don't understand why. The cyberpunk aesthetic has been a hugely popular visual direction and setting for the last decade or so, but something like a Blade Runner-esque city has never been done on screen in Doctor Who, and that just leaves so much missed potential. In any other sci-fi property, it would seem cliche to do such a setting like this, but Doctor Who has never done it on screen, so it's in the unique position of such a setting being a desirable variation from the norm. And even outside of the orbit of Earth, there are so many settings waiting to be explored. Episodes have shown us unique planets like Midnight and Akheton, but these are few and far between, with most alien planets either being dark quarries or nondescript ice planets. We've always had these brief glimpses of other worlds with striking geology and natural architecture or vibrant ecosystems, but they're just that. Glimpses, before we return to the usual scheduled programming of 21st century London or Victorian England. It's so boring and safe. It's too easy and inoffensive, especially considering everything classic Who was able to achieve with its limited budget. Sometimes I just find myself so frustrated by the modern show's lack of ambition even within the solar system, as we get constant space stations. Hell, we don't even get moon bases anymore, and that's sci-fi 101. I've made a video in the past about modern Doctor Who needing to establish more recurring settings aside from Earth, replacing it with things like Peladon or New Earth, but I really can't emphasise enough the need to diversify settings, and there are so many on our own doorstep. We could explore sky cities in the clouds of Venus, terraformed Mars, the deep mysterious oceans of Europa, the volcanoes of Io. Hell, throw us to the far future where humanity has established a Dyson sphere around the sun. Expanded media has had so many interesting sci-fi settings, but the main show just doesn't do that. It's always the same stuff, and that has caused a significant sense of setting stagnation because it never feels like there's anything truly new anymore. This issue also extends to the narratives themselves. I've spoken before about how most Doctor Who episodes fit into a few categories or story types. These are things like Earth Invasion, Monster of the Week, Base Under Siege, and so on. This has always been a fundamental part of the structure of the show, and it has served it faithfully. But over the years, these narrative types have almost become a crutch, a checklist similar to the monsters I mentioned earlier. The modern era introduced celebrity historicals and Doctor companion light stories, but that was nearly 20 years ago, and I don't feel confident in saying that any new genres or story types have really been introduced since, outside of maybe Sleep No More with its found footage horror, although Love and Monsters in 2006 was also mainly found footage. And hey, this isn't to say everything has to be new. Midnight and Heaven Sent are great companion light stories, separated by nearly a decade, but the wider majority of stories have begun to feel a little more formulaic than ever before. It makes you wonder if it's even possible to introduce new narrative formats, or if it's some kind of dead end. Well, spoiler, it's not a dead end. Obviously. Storytelling is an incredible, near limitless playground where you can constantly experiment, hybridize, and create to achieve incredible outcomes. It feels like the obvious example, but fellow BBC show Inside Number 9 is chock full of amazing and different stories with very unique formats. The literal second episode of the entire show is a silent episode with no dialogue, only diegetic sound and music. Now imagine that in Doctor Who, an entirely silent story taking place because of a lack of sound in space. It's kind of like how some Big Finish audios have written the lack of visuals into the scripts themselves. I believe Embrace the Darkness is very much taking place completely in darkness, so what you're hearing is what the characters are seeing as well. Inside Number 9 is also known for its very meta, mind-bending storytelling. The episodes The Devil of Christmas and Deadline, along with the Hold On Tight fiasco, all show an incredible level of media manipulation that could be explored at least once with Doctor Who, surely. Rhys Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton are good friends with longtime Doctor Who writer Mark Gatiss, even appearing in the show themselves, and Inside Number 9 has featured countless Doctor Who actors, so there's really a great case for trying to get the writing duo to write for Doctor Who itself to breathe new life into the medium and turn everything upside down in the best way possible. To modern Doctor Who's credit, it does seem to be taking a few more risks, with musicals seeming to be something the upcoming era is seeking to explore to an extent. Now, as you may know, I hate musicals, but at least it's something new, something different. Maybe the show could also try to play with genres like legal dramas, but actually, not like that. Doctor Who desperately needs a breath of fresh air and a sense of unpredictability again. Risks need to be taken, like with Sleep No More, which was a fantastic idea and had a lot of potential for success. For the whole of the modern era, the show has been obsessed with questioning who is Doctor Who, not what is Doctor Who. Let me take you back to the end of the 1960s. Doctor Who had been on air for nearly 7 years, with 2 Doctors and around 253 episodes. That's an impressive run by itself, but audiences were growing pretty restless and the show was being seen as formulaic and, well, stagnant, with a lot of the same issues I've raised today. It felt like Doctor Who was treading water and not innovating, so it faced cancellation because it had simply run its course. However, despite these dwindling ratings and audiences drifting away, the production team decided to change things up, completely overhauling the entire format and genre of the show. Thus, the third Doctor was exiled to Earth, unable to use his trusty TARDIS. Instead of time-travelling space travel, the show was kind of turned into a sci-fi procedural cop drama with a central base of operations and a recurring group of characters. And it really worked. It completely changed the trajectory of Doctor Who by turning the show on its head and changing the format entirely to something very different and fresh, with the break from the norm eventually launching the show back into the stratosphere when the familiar elements returned to great fanfare after a good, earned rest. Now look, I'm not saying current Doctor Who needs to copy that early Third Doctor era, that wouldn't work these days. My point is that an inventive overhaul could really change things up. For all its flaws, Flux at least tries something new for the modern show, with a single story series akin to something you'd see on a streaming platform. Of course, it was very rough around the edges and not well planned out, but it showed that a change of format could create a really good break from the norm to refresh things before then returning to what we know and expect, similar to that Third Doctor era. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, as they say, so refining the single story series approach of Flux would make the weekly anthology style stories feel a lot more interesting and varied than they currently do. I've always thought they could do this by taking inspiration from season 12 of Classic Who, with the series arc being a search for the TARDIS, which is missing or stolen or whatever. It doesn't matter if the Doctor is stranded on Earth or Arrakis, it'd be a refreshing change of pace to force the character to stay in one place for a series, interacting with the world around them and dealing with the side characters and ongoing challenges it presents. Doctor Who is almost too malleable sometimes. there's too much potential that it can overwhelm writers and fans. So stripping things down to the very basics just for one single series could really achieve a lot. And hey, even if you don't want to do such an extreme change, there's still a lot of non-sci-fi story types and formats Doctor Who could be inspired by. Think of things like mythology or, I dread to say it, anime. Hey, look, I hate anime, but every medium has stuff you can pull from if you're smart enough. And I don't mean making the Doctor Goku, they did that already and it kinda sucked. I more mean the themes and the wider storytelling. Like how Lion King smashes together Hamlet and the Bible stories of Joseph and Moses to create one of the most iconic and beloved Disney movies of all time. That's the exact kind of outside the box, bigger picture storytelling Doctor Who could really benefit from. Lastly, another commonly criticised element of New Who is the almost stagnant companion creation. Almost every companion these days tends to be from contemporary Earth, with any friendly aliens or historical characters simply being side characters. Now, I understand why they do this, since the companion is always intended to be a sympathetic and relatable audience surrogate of sorts. Take Rose Tyler for example. She's an ordinary young adult with a dead-end job and family issues, longing for a sense of escape and excitement. Rose is therefore a character anyone can easily relate to in some form or another, and she's a great part of Series 1, the exact type of companion needed at that point in time. However, the problem comes from every subsequent main character having a similar character outline, making everything feel so repetitive. It's very easy to relate to and be sympathetic towards a historical character or an alien. They don't have to be a human from current day Britain. Look at things like Guardians of the Galaxy making you care about an anthropomorphic talking raccoon. Or WALL-E making you root for two robots to fall in love. Star Trek had lots of alien protagonists like Worf, so there's so many examples of heroic, non-human figures in sci-fi. It's almost a bit lazy and creatively bankrupt for Doctor Who writers to assume audiences can only ever relate to companions who are exactly like them. Not only does expanded media showcase a litany of interesting, relatable, unconventional companions like a shapeshifting penguin, a living TARDIS, and a full-blown Cyberman, but some of these unconventional companions are among the most notable and celebrated ones. Liv Chenker is the definitive 8th Doctor companion, and she's from a different planet, so there's no excuse for this insistence on every companion being from current day Earth. Classic Who also featured a lot of varied companions, with the 5th Doctor not travelling with a single companion from contemporary England. He instead travelled with Adric, Nyssa and Turlough, who were aliens, Tegan and Perry, who were Australian and American respectively, and Chameleon, a shape-shifting robot. Some of these companions are beloved and adored parts of the Doctor Who tapestry, and they completely break the mould of the show's later format, which is so disappointing because it shows how Doctor Who has gone backwards in that regard. It's been almost 20 years since New Who began, and in that same time span, Classic Who saw the Doctor travelling with Time Lords, Highlanders and alien warriors. There was so much variation there, keeping things fresh and exciting. Of course, there were still a lot of contemporary British companions making up the majority, but we at least had that variation reminding us of how extensive the Doctor's travelling abilities are. To its credit, New Who has tried a couple of times to showcase companion figures from other times or worlds, but these usually only last for one episode or as side characters like Captain Jack or River Song. Hell, even Handles, a severed Cyberman head, has a lot of fan support as a companion figure, so it's definitely possible to create these unconventional companions on screen. I know it's not exactly feasible to have a full series with a Lupari type companion because of all the makeup and prosthetics needed, but even simply writing a human actor as an alien can do wonders, as we've seen so many times, and even with Nardole for example. I just think it's a problem when the biggest recent departure from the norm has been two middle-aged white men from England. Thrilling stuff! I love Doctor Who, I really do, but things seem so stagnant right now. We're always seeing the same locations, the same villains, the same companion archetypes over and over again. There's so much potential for this show, but it feels like that potential is all being wasted in favour of playing everything safe. Doctor Who could do so much more. There's so many stories from other media and Doctor Who's own ecosystem that the show can pull from. Build up new villains, explore new settings, just push the boat out and experiment for a change. I do have hope that the current era will do so, as shown by none of the big three villains appearing in the 60th anniversary trilogy, with the Toymaker instead serving as the climactic villain. As far as I'm aware, there's no indication of the big three villains in Series 14, so I'm desperately hoping for new big ones, and also for the series to continue the Chibnall era's push into other countries and other historical periods. This is a beautiful show promising all of time and space, but it hasn't been delivering on that promise for a long time, even seemingly being unable to do basic things Classic Who did multiple decades ago. Stagnation is a fate arguably worse than cancellation for a show like Doctor Who. With ratings and mainstream interest always on a knife's edge, the show even almost got cancelled until Russell T Davies came back. Innovation is crucial, as shown many times before in the show's history, and it's time to take note of those successes and change things for the betterment of Doctor Who as a whole. But what do you think? Is Doctor Who stagnating, or am I just imagining it? But if you do think it's stagnating, how should it try and freshen things up? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez, my Diamond level patron Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons Matthew Burns and Maximilian Foreman, and all my Gold level patrons Daniel Shillito, Francois aka Line Vortex, Lee Marie Farrell, Thomas R, and Thomas Price. Thank you so much for your support.